The night I buried my husband, the rain tasted like rust when it touched my lips. I remember that first. Not the prayers, not the faces, not even the sound of dirt hitting the casket, but the way the rain slid down my chin and into my mouth as I stood there, hands folded too neatly, pretending my legs weren't shaking. Someone had offered me an umbrella. I shook my head without looking at them. I thought if I let myself stay dry, I might float away from the truth of it. Alex Reed was dead, they said. My husband, 36 years old. A car fire so intense they warned me not to view the body. Closed casket, quick arrangements, quiet condolences, everything wrapped up efficiently, like a problem someone else was eager to solve for me. I kept thinking, this is too fast for a life to end. The cemetery smelled like wet grass and fresh soil. My black dress clung to my legs, heavy with rain, and my shoes sank a little deeper into the mud with every shift of my weight. Cassandra stood to my left, my sister-in-law, Alex's brother's widow, her hand resting protectively over her stomach even then, though no one knew she was pregnant yet. She cried softly. The kind of crying that sounds practiced, delicate. My father, Robert Vance, stood on my other side, stiff and distant, his hand hovering near my elbow like he might steady me or shove me, depending on his mood. I did not cry. That worried people. They kept glancing at me, whispering behind gloved hands. Grief, they say, looks different on everyone. But I could feel their judgment anyway, settling on my shoulders like another layer of damp cloth. I wanted to tell them my tears were somewhere deeper, caught behind my ribs, where the shock had pinned them in place. Alex had kissed my forehead that morning before leaving. I could still feel it cool lips, faint scent of his cologne and burnt coffee. I'll be late, he'd said. Don't wait up. I never got the chance to miss him. Before death entered our home like an uninvited guest, my life had been ordinary. Not perfect, not tragic, just quietly, predictably mine. Alex and I lived in a narrow townhouse with creaking stairs and a kitchen window that rattled whenever the wind came from the east. Every morning, I woke before him, padding barefoot across the cold tiles to start the coffee. I liked the sound of it brewing steady, dependable. Alex used to joke that I loved routines more than people. Maybe I did. Routines didn't lie. He worked in logistics. Long hours, vague explanations. I taught part-time and handled the rest of the house. We ate dinner together when we could. Usually something simple, pasta, roasted chicken, soup when the weather turned. On Sundays, we did laundry and argued gently about whose turn it was to fold towels. Cassandra came by often after her husband, Alex's older brother, passed away 2 years earlier. She was fragile then, all sharp bones and hollow eyes, grief clinging to her like a shadow. I made room for her without thinking. Extra place at the table, extra blanket on the couch, extra patience when she snapped over nothing. Family takes care of family. That was the rule I'd been raised on, even if my father had never followed it himself. Robert Vance was not a gentleman. He believed love was something you earned by obedience, and silence was the price of survival. My mother learned that too late. I learned it early. By the time I married Alex, I had already mastered the art of shrinking myself just enough to fit wherever I was placed. Alex noticed that about me. At least, he said he did. You're strong, he used to tell me, squeezing my hand in public like it was proof. You just don't know it yet. I believed him then. The first strange thing happened a week after the funeral. I was standing in the kitchen, rinsing a cup that hadn't been used, when the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Mrs. Reed? A man asked when I answered. His voice was clipped, professional. Yes, I said, my throat tightening around the word. There's an issue with your husband's life insurance paperwork. We need to confirm a few details. I remember gripping the edge of the counter, feeling the laminate dig into my palm. Issue, details, words that didn't belong in a world where my husband was already in the ground. He asked about Alex's signature, about a recent change in beneficiaries, about a brother, Daniel Reed, who, according to their records, had been present at the signing. Daniel, I repeated. Alex's brother had died years ago. I'd attended that funeral too. Different cemetery. Same rain. Yes, the man said slowly. Is there a problem? I told him there must be a mistake. My voice sounded calm, even to me. That worried me more than if I'd screamed. After the call ended, I stood there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the darkened microwave door. My face looked older, thinner, as if grief had already begun to carve me into someone else. I told myself it was a clerical error. Paperwork often was. I told myself not to bother Cassandra with it. She had enough on her plate. I told myself Alex was dead, and dead men couldn't sign documents. Still, that night, as I lay alone in our bed, listening to the house settle and creak around me, I had the strangest thought. What if the thing that hurt the most hadn't happened yet? The question lodged itself in my chest, quiet and heavy, like a stone dropped into deep water. I turned onto my side, pressing my face into Alex's pillow. It still smelled faintly of him, or maybe I was imagining it. Grief does that, blurs the edges between memory and hope. Outside, the wind rattled the kitchen window. Inside, something I couldn't name had begun to shift. Grief does not arrive all at once. It comes in waves, and sometimes it comes disguised as paperwork. In the days after that phone call, I found myself surrounded by documents I didn't remember signing. Folders Alex had labeled in his precise, slanted handwriting, and envelopes that arrived without warning. I moved through the house like a guest, touching things softly, as if I might wake him if I wasn't careful. Cassandra started coming over more often. She would knock gently, as though afraid of startling me, and step inside with that careful smile that never quite reached her eyes. She brought casseroles that tasted like salt and obligation. She folded herself into the armchair across from me, hands always resting on her stomach now, though she still hadn't said a word about it. "You shouldn't be alone so much," she told me one afternoon, her voice low and soothing. "It's not healthy." I looked at her then, really looked. The hollows in her cheeks were gone. There was color in her skin. Life, returning. "I like the quiet," I said. She tilted her head, studying me the way nurses do patients who won't take their medicine. Alex wouldn't have wanted that. Alex wouldn't have wanted a lot of things that had already happened. I kept that to myself. It was Cassandra who suggested I see a doctor when the dizziness started. At first, it came only when I stood too quickly. A brief spinning, a darkening at the edges of my vision. I blamed it on skipped meals, on sleepless nights, but soon it lingered longer, settling into my bones like a low hum. "You're pale," Cassandra said one morning, pressing a cool hand to my forehead without asking. "Elena, you might be anemic. You've lost so much weight." She had started calling me Elena more often, stretching my name like we were closer than we'd ever been. She drove me to appointments, sat beside me in waiting rooms, spoke for me when I was too tired to argue. Doctors asked questions. Tests were ordered. Blood was drawn. Too much blood. I noticed it the third time they filled vial after vial, my arm aching, my vision tunneling. "Is all of this necessary?" I asked, my voice thin. The nurse glanced at Cassandra, who nodded reassuringly. "We're just being thorough." I trusted her. I trusted Cassandra because she cried at my husband's funeral and slept under my roof. Because she was family. Because I had been raised to believe that blood, once shared, was sacred. I didn't know then how literal that belief would become. The first time I saw him again, I thought grief had finally broken my mind. It was at the pharmacy, of all places, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of disinfectant and cheap perfume. I was waiting in line, leaning heavily on my cart, when someone laughed behind me, low, familiar. I turned slowly, my heart beginning to race. The man standing near the greeting cards had Alex's posture, the same slight tilt of his head, the same scar near his temple, half hidden by his hair. But his face was different. Beard thicker, hair darker, glasses he never used to wear. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then he smiled. It was not Alex's smile. It was colder, sharper, like a mask slipping into place. "Excuse me," he said, stepping past me as though we were strangers. I stood there shaking, my breath coming in shallow pulls. A woman behind me asked if I was all right. I nodded, paid for my things, walked to my car on legs that felt like they didn't belong to me. By the time I looked back, he was gone. I told myself I had imagined it. The brain does cruel things to the grieving. Faces blur, memories overlap. The mind reaches for what it misses most. Still, that night, I locked the door twice. Not long after, Cassandra suggested I move in with her. "You shouldn't be rattling around that big house alone," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "And with your health the way it is, it would give me peace of mind." I hesitated. That house was full of Alex, of us. Leaving it felt like another kind of death. "Just for a little while," she added quickly. "Until you're stronger." So I packed a suitcase, left my keys on the counter, followed her to a place that never felt like home. Cassandra's apartment was immaculate, almost sterile. Everything had a place. Everything stayed there. She set up the guest room carefully, laying out my clothes, adjusting the pillows. The windows didn't open all the way. "You'll be safe here," she said, locking the door behind us. Safe. The word echoed in my head that night as I lay awake, listening to unfamiliar sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic. Somewhere in the apartment, Cassandra moved quietly, her footsteps measured. I thought of the man in the pharmacy, of the insurance paperwork, of the blood vials. When I finally slept, I dreamed of falling. The abuse didn't begin with shouting or bruises. It began with control dressed up as care. Cassandra managed my medications, insisting I take what the doctor prescribed pills I didn't recognize. At times that left me groggy and compliant. She drove me to more appointments, more tests, more blood drawn. You have a rare condition, she told me once, her hand resting on my shoulder. Your blood helps stabilize mine. The doctor says it's temporary. Her words washed over me, heavy and confusing. I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to leave, but my body felt slow, my thoughts syrup thick. Then he started coming around. She introduced him as Daniel. My brother-in-law, she said brightly. Alex's brother. I stared at him, my heart pounding so loudly I thought he must hear it. Up close, there was no mistaking it. The curve of his mouth, the way his eyes slid over me, calculating. Alex, alive, wearing another man's name like a borrowed coat. Nice to finally meet you, he said, extending his hand. When his fingers closed around mine, his grip tightened just enough to hurt. Likewise, I whispered, my voice barely there. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. You look tired, Elena, he murmured. We'll take good care of you. That was the moment I understood. I was not a guest in Cassandra's home. I was a resource. Once you realize you are no longer a person to someone, only a thing, the world narrows in frightening ways. Alex, no, Daniel, as he insisted on being called, became a regular presence after that. He arrived in the evenings, always with a reason. To check on Cassandra, to discuss finances, to help with my care. He moved through the apartment with confidence, as though he had always belonged there, as though my fear was an inconvenience rather than a warning. They spoke over me, around me, about me. She's weak today, Cassandra would say, her fingers resting on her swollen belly. Maybe we should wait. Alex would glance at me, his eyes flat. She'll manage. Manage meant another needle in my arm. Another form slid across a desk I was too tired to read. Another evening spent on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of antiseptic, listening to them whisper in the kitchen. At night, I cried silently into my pillow, careful not to make a sound. I tried to plan, but my thoughts came apart as soon as I touched them. I was always dizzy, always exhausted. I told myself I was being dramatic, that this was grief, layered on illness, layered on stress. That was how they kept me there, by making me doubt my own reality. The first time Alex hurt me deliberately, it was almost subtle. We were leaving a clinic, Cassandra waddling ahead of us, when a car backfired nearby. I flinched, the sound too close, too sudden. Alex's hand shot out, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. Careful, he hissed, low and sharp. You'll draw attention. His fingers dug into my skin. I smelled his cologne something darker than what he used to wear, more expensive. For a split second, I considered screaming, running, but Cassandra turned, her eyes wide with concern. Is everything okay? Alex released me instantly, his face smooth. She got dizzy. I nodded, smiled, played my part. Later, in the bathroom, I lifted my sleeve and saw the mark blooming there, purple and ugly. I pressed my thumb into it, grounding myself in the pain. This was real. I was not imagining it. The next escalation came with paperwork. Alex sat me down at the dining table one afternoon, spreading documents neatly in front of me. Cassandra hovered nearby, watching my face. Just some things we need you to sign, Alex said. Power of attorney, temporary guardianship, in case your condition worsens. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen. The words swam on the page. What condition? I asked. They exchanged a look. Your episodes, Cassandra said gently. The confusion, the fainting. The doctor thinks stress has triggered something more serious. Alex leaned forward, his voice dropping into something that sounded like concern. We're just trying to protect you, Elena. Protect me from what? I didn't sign that day. I claimed a headache, pushed the papers away. Alex's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That night, I woke to the sound of raised voices. Can't keep waiting, Alex was saying. She's getting suspicious. She's fragile, Cassandra snapped. If we push too hard, she's useless to us if she won't cooperate. I pressed my ear to the bedroom door, my heart pounding. She'll sign, Alex continued. One way or another. The next morning, Cassandra told me we were going to visit a specialist. He's very good, she said, helping me into my coat. Very understanding. The building didn't look like a clinic. It was too quiet, too isolated. The receptionist didn't meet my eyes. The doctor spoke to Cassandra and Alex more than to me. He asked vague questions, took notes, nodded. At the end of the appointment, he folded his hands and smiled. I think it would be best if Elena spent some time under observation, for her own safety. My mouth went dry. What does that mean? Alex placed a hand on my shoulder, heavy and possessive. It means you're going to get the help you need. I tried to stand, The room tilted. 2 orderlies appeared at the door, as if summoned by a signal I hadn't seen. "No," I said, my voice rising for the first time in weeks. "I don't consent." Alex leaned close, his lips brushing my hair. "You signed," he whispered. They strapped me to a gurney while Cassandra cried loudly, telling anyone who would listen how hard this was for her. I screamed then. I couldn't help it. The sound tore out of me, raw and desperate. No one listened. The hospital smelled like bleach and despair. They took my clothes, my phone, my name. I became a room number, a chart, a problem to be managed. They sedated me often. Time blurred. Days bled into nights. Alex and Cassandra visited together. Always brief, always controlled. "You just need a rest," Cassandra said, smoothing my hair. "The baby doesn't like stress. Baby." The word landed like a blow. "How far along?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Cassandra smiled. 6 months. I did the math in my head. Numb and shaking, Alex stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder. "I fell," Cassandra said softly. "Early on, Elena gave blood. It saved us." I laughed then, a broken hysterical sound. "You're monsters." Alex's eyes hardened. "Careful." The final straw came not in the hospital, but after. I was released weeks later. Thinner, weaker, with a diagnosis that followed me like a stain. Cassandra took me back to her apartment, triumphant. The balcony was small, the railing cold beneath my palms. Cassandra stood near the edge, arguing with Alex in low voices. I watched from a few steps away, the city spread out below us. Suddenly Cassandra slipped. She screamed. Alex moved fast. He didn't grab her. He shoved me. I felt the air rush from my lungs as my body hit the railing. Pain exploded through my back. I remember thinking, with strange clarity, so this is how it ends. Alex caught Cassandra as she fell against him, cradling her protectively. "You're safe," he murmured. I lay there gasping, my body twisted at an impossible angle, understanding settling over me like a final, terrible truth. He had chosen. Pain has a way of sharpening memory. I remember the sound my body made when it hit the balcony floor, a dull, wet thud that didn't sound human. I remember the cold biting into my cheek, the sky above me spinning slowly, like it was bored with my suffering. I remember Cassandra screaming my name, not in fear for me, but in performance high, frantic, convincing. Alex didn't look at me. He crouched beside Cassandra, his hands gentle as he checked her stomach, his voice soft and urgent. "The baby, are you okay? Talk to me." I think so," she sobbed, clinging to him. "Oh God, Alex." She said his real name. It was the first time I'd heard it spoken out loud since the funeral. I tried to speak, tried to tell them I was alive, that I could feel my legs, but not without fire tearing through them, that something inside me felt wrong, but my mouth wouldn't form the words. My body had decided it had done enough. Sirens came. Neighbors shouted. Someone called my name again, maybe Cassandra, maybe someone else. Hands lifted me. A stretcher, a ceiling sliding past in fragments of light. As they wheeled me away, Alex finally looked down at me. There was no remorse in his eyes, only calculation. The hospital room smelled different this time. Cleaner, brighter, but no less lonely. I woke with machines humming beside me, my body wrapped in pain so deep, it felt like silence. A doctor explained my injuries carefully, like he was afraid sudden words might break me further. Fractured vertebrae, internal bleeding, months of recovery. "You're lucky," he said gently. "Lucky." Cassandra visited once. She stood at the foot of my bed, her hands folded, her eyes dry. "The police ruled it an accident," she said. "You startled me. I lost my balance." I stared at her, my chest aching more from betrayal than injury. "And Alex?" I asked. She smiled thinly. "Daniel's been so worried about me." That was when something inside me went very still. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I let them believe I was broken beyond repair. Let them think the hospital had finally done what they couldn't silence me. But lying there, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, I made a promise to myself. If I survived this, I would never be powerless again. The divorce papers were filed from my hospital bed. Alex didn't contest them. He didn't need to. He thought he had already won. Cassandra sent me flowers with a note that said, "Wishing you peace." I threw them away without opening the card. Julian Thorne visited me 3 days after the surgery. I hadn't seen him in years, not since the fire. I was 8 years old when our house caught fire in the middle of the night. Smoke, heat, screaming. I remember coughing so hard I thought my lungs would tear. I remember a stranger's arms lifting me, carrying me through flames that painted the world orange and black. Julian had been a teenager then, volunteering with his father. He carried me out, shielded me with his body when the roof collapsed behind us. He never left my side until my mother arrived. Years later, an accident took his ability to walk. Life has a cruel sense of symmetry. Julian rolled into my hospital room quietly, his movements careful, respectful. He looked older, sharper around the eyes, but his voice was the same. "Elena," he said softly. "I heard what happened. I tried to sit up. Failed." "Don't," he said quickly. "Please." He stayed. He listened. I told him everything, not all at once, but in pieces, like offering fragments of a shattered mirror. He didn't interrupt, didn't doubt, didn't ask why I hadn't fought harder. When I finished, he took my hand. "You don't have to be strong anymore," he said. "You just have to heal." He proposed 3 months later, not with a ring at first, with a question. "Would you let me build something with you?" he asked, his eyes steady. "Not to save you, just to stand beside you." I said yes. Recovery was brutal. Physical therapy, legal battles. Nights where the pain crept in and whispered that I would always be that woman on the balcony floor. Julian never rushed me. He adapted his world to mine, not the other way around. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of who I had been before I learned to shrink. Together, we founded the Vance Group. I took my family name back, not as inheritance, but as reclamation. We started small. Consulting, strategic investments, ethical acquisitions. Julian provided the capital. I provided the vision. Power looks different when it's earned. News of Alex reached me eventually. His fake identity unraveled. His finances collapsed. Desperate, he came to me thin, shaking, stripped of his arrogance. He begged. I listened. Then I handed my lawyer the will he had once made me sign back when he thought I was his. It gave me everything. I didn't smile when Cassandra was sentenced to life. I didn't celebrate when my father, Robert Vance, lost everything and suffered a stroke that left him paralyzed and penniless. Justice is not loud. It is quiet. Final. Clean. Now, I sit at our dining table, Julian's hand warm in mine, laughter echoing down the hall where our children argue over nothing important at all. The past still exists, but it no longer owns me. Power does not announce itself when it arrives. It settles in quietly, like confidence returning to a voice that once shook. The public unraveling of Alex Reed did not happen in one dramatic explosion. It happened in layers, documents surfacing, testimonies aligning, lies collapsing under the weight of their own contradictions. By the time his face appeared on the evening news, pale and hollow-eyed, being escorted into a courthouse, I had already stopped flinching at the sound of his name. Still, I watched. I watched because part of reclaiming myself meant no longer looking away. They called him by both names in the headlines. Alex Reed, who lived for nearly a year under the false identity of his deceased brother. They spoke of fraud, insurance manipulation, unlawful medical procedures. The phrase forced medical exploitation appeared more than once. Each time I heard it, my stomach tightened not with fear, but with recognition. Cassandra's trial followed. She sat in court in a pale blue dress, her hair neatly brushed, her hands folded over an empty lap. The baby had been born months earlier and placed into protective custody when the truth emerged. I did not attend that hearing. Some losses are better mourned from a distance. When Cassandra testified, her voice shook. She spoke of love, of fear, of being manipulated by a man she trusted. She cried when she spoke of me. Elena was always fragile, she said, dabbing at her eyes. I only wanted to help her. I didn't react. I had learned by then that silence is often the most honest response. The evidence told the rest. Medical records, surveillance footage, witnesses from the hospital who remembered my screams and the signatures that hadn't quite matched. A neighbor who had heard Alex say, "She'll break the fall," just seconds before my body hit the railing. The sentence life imprisonment was delivered without ceremony. I exhaled slowly when I heard it. Not in relief, not in triumph, just in acceptance. My father's reckoning came last. Robert Vance had always believed himself untouchable. Money, intimidation, and a well-practiced charm had carried him through decades of cruelty without consequence. When the Vance Group acquired the last company propping up his lifestyle, he called me for the first time in years. "You owe me?" He snapped into the phone, his voice sharp despite age. "After everything I did for you? You taught me how to survive," I said calmly. "That's all you ever gave me." He threatened lawsuits, public disgrace, family shame. 2 weeks later, the stroke took his speech and half his body with it. I visited him once, standing at the foot of his bed, the room filled with the quiet beeping of machines. His eyes followed me, angry and afraid. "I'm not here to forgive you," I told him softly. "I'm here to let you know I'm free." He couldn't answer. For the first time in my life, he didn't need to. Healing did not come all at once either. There were mornings I woke reaching for pain that wasn't there anymore, and nights when the memory of the balcony returned so vividly, I had to ground myself by pressing my feet into the floor. Trauma leaves echoes. It does not vanish just because justice arrives. Julian understood that. He never asked me to move on. He asked me what I needed. Some days, that meant silence. Other days, it meant work pouring myself into contracts, negotiations, decisions that reminded me I was capable, sharp, alive. The Vance Group grew steadily, built on transparency and ethics, on the kind of leadership that does not require fear to function. People started calling me formidable. I smiled at that. At home, we built something gentler. Julian's wheelchair became just another piece of furniture present. Important, but not defining. We cooked together, burned dinners, laughed at mistakes. We argued sometimes, too, but never in ways that left scars. When the children came into our lives through love, through choice, through patience, I learned what safety felt like in my bones. Safety is not the absence of danger. It is the presence of trust. One afternoon, years later, I received a letter from Alex. The envelope was thin, the handwriting unfamiliar, unsteady, humbled. He wrote of regret, of loneliness, of remembering the woman I used to be. I read it once, then I folded it carefully and placed it in the fire. Julian watched without comment, his hand resting lightly against my back. "Do you ever wonder," he asked gently, "who you'd be if none of it had happened?" I thought about that for a long time. Then I shook my head. No, because I like who I am now. That is the quiet miracle of survival. You don't return to yourself. You become someone new, someone who knows her worth because she paid dearly to learn it. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is still and the world feels far away, I think of the woman standing in the rain at a graveside, tasting rust on her lips, believing her life had ended with a lie. I wish I could tell her this. You will lose everything you thought defined you. And then, slowly, you will build something truer in its place. The door to my past is closed now. Not locked, closed because I no longer need to guard it. There is a moment, after everything is over, when the noise finally fades. No courtrooms, no sirens, no whispers behind closed doors. Just the sound of your own breath returning to a steady rhythm. That was the moment I understood something I wish I had learned much earlier in life. Survival is not the same as living. For years, I survived by staying quiet, by trusting the wrong people, by believing love meant endurance and family meant obligation. I told myself that if I just held on long enough, things would soften. They didn't. They sharpened. What saved me wasn't revenge. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't even justice, though justice mattered. What saved me was the day I stopped asking for permission to exist. Julian once told me that fire doesn't only destroy, it reveals what was strong enough to remain. I didn't believe him then. I do now, because everything false in my life burned away, and what was left was something solid, something honest, something mine. If you are listening to this story while sitting in silence, if you are doubting your own memories, if someone has convinced you that your pain is inconvenient or imaginary, please hear me. Love should never require you to disappear. Family should never cost you your safety. And power, real power, begins the moment you decide you are no longer willing to be broken quietly. I didn't get my old life back. I got something better. I got myself. So let me ask you gently, honestly, if you were standing on that balcony, knowing what I know now, would you choose silence, or would you choose yourself? Tell me in the comments, and if this story touched something tender in you, stay here with us. Subscribe. Share. You never know who might need to hear that survival can become something more.